Thanks everyone for joining us today. I wish we were having the Hort conference in person, but that's not possible this year. So, but I'm glad that we have this backup option, and I'd like to give a real strong shout out to Petrus and his team, Laurie and the others that have put this together and put the publicity out and organized it. So, so yeah, I'd rather be face to face with you all, but as a backup option, I think this still works. So hopefully this works okay. Let me share my screen and we'll get started with my talk today. What I want to do is divide this in two parts. And so the first part, we'll talk about young trees, about what do we do when we have some land, and we talk about planting an orchard from scratch. What are some of the steps involved? The second part will be about older trees, and how do we best manage older trees to get them to perform well for us. And so we've got these two parts here. One of the challenges with something like this is right now we have 67 people online, and my guess is that out of that 67, there are some of you that have been fruit growers, apple growers for quite some time, and I would say skilled growers sort of fine-tuning their operations a little bit. There are probably also people online that are at the other end of the continuum, where they're just starting out. Maybe they're just getting into fruit production for the first time and have about 1 million questions and trying to find their way. And so I'll try to go through from the beginning. And so for those more established growers, I ask for your patience if I go over some things that you already know. So let's see. So here's my, hopefully you can see this. It says Apple Orchard Management. It's got a picture of a beautiful pink lady tree from the Apple Works, actually, Sarah. So we were down there doing an experiment a number of years ago, and the trees were looking good. The fruit color was fantastic. So we took some pictures of that. Yeah. And so,
Peter,
yes.
We're seeing basically 3 screens here. I don't know if you've got your PowerPoint on the wrong setting, maybe?
I don't know the answer to that, but thanks for letting me know, Perry.
You are on presenter view. So if you can show slideshow, should be able to, it should work. Do
slideshow, play from start. How about that? Is that better?
That is also, yeah, presenter view.
Okay. Man, I thought I was being so clever here.
Peter, we're just impressed that you've got coherent stuff on the slide, so don't worry about
it. Well, I guess I've been successful in training you all to have such low expectations, and maybe that's coming into play here. How about if I just do this? Is that going to be useful? Can you see that main slide?
We can see it, Peter. If you just click slide show up there right under the top bar, it should get you where you want to go.
Yeah, it keeps going to presenter view like this though, which apparently is not showing. Use slideshow. That's what we want. How about that?
I know some people stop.
Are we in business?
And then you're good.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for your patience, everyone. Hopefully that's the end of our technical issues for today, but we'll see how it goes. So, okay, so let's talk about starting an orchard from scratch. Okay, so we're going to start our orchard, and there's a lot of things to think about. And I know that many of you have seen this before, the orchard system puzzle. And this is, in some ways, it's kind of simple, but it pays for us to keep this in mind, because as we're designing different pieces of the orchard puzzle here, I mean, there's a lot of different pieces we can choose, but the key thing to keep in mind is these pieces have to fit together. And so there's a lot of rootstocks you could choose, for instance. And so here we have rootstock in the right-hand side. And so a lot of different rootstocks, but depending on the rootstock you choose, you're going to probably plant those trees at a different tree density. You may want to train them differently. You may want to prune them differently. So all these things have to fit together. And of course, it's not just the puzzle itself on our orchard. There's all these external things that influence our decisions. And so things like market requirements, labor, variety, pesticide concerns, management skill, all these things come into play in helping us decide which particular pieces of this puzzle we're going to choose. And certainly the varieties that we grow now are very different to the varieties that we grew 10, 20 years ago, because the market requirements have changed. Our orchard systems have changed. And one of the things that's driven us to plant different kinds of orchard systems is the labor issue. Not so much the cost of labor, but the availability of labor. And so we're interested in orchard systems now that are very labor efficient. And so that's become a major factor that's driven some of our decisions on the orchard itself. So I think that going from planting to first harvest, these are some of the steps, or these are the steps that I think we need to address. First thing, we need to order trees. Second thing, we need to prepare the site where we're going to plant those trees. Next, we're going to actually plant the trees. We're going to train and we're going to prune those trees. Then we're going to manage the crop load, and we've got to control some pests. And hopefully, step number 7, we're going to count some money at the end of this, because we're doing this as a commercial enterprise. And so we're hoping to make money out of this. So ordering trees, there's a lot that goes into ordering trees. We need to think about the nursery, the cultivar, rootstock choice, and the tree quality. And so there's all kinds of nurseries out there, and they all have their glossy catalogs and make everything look wonderful. And I'm not dissing out on the nursery industry. You know, they have a job to do, and they're trying to sell trees. And but in their catalogs, many of them have fantastic catalogs that give some details about the various cultivars, the varieties that are available. They also give some information about the ripening times of those. And so that's something to take in mind as well. Often they have information on the disease susceptibility or resistance of those. And so the other piece of ordering trees is we're not growing just a gala tree or a honeycrisp tree. We are growing a compound tree. So that tree that we buy from the nursery is already grafted. It's already grafted on a rootstock. And so when we choose a tree, when we order a tree, we're choosing the top piece and the bottom piece. The top piece is our cultivar or our Scion, and that's our Gala, our Fuji, our Honeycrisp, our Jonathan, whatever it might be. And the bottom piece is the rootstock. The rootstock is still an apple. It's a different variety of apple, and they're known by codes and numbers. And unless you're in the industry, it makes no sense at all. Things like G935 or B9 or M9T337, all these codes. And so, but many of the catalogs have recommendations on rootstocks, and rootstocks are important because they're the main factor that influences tree size, how big that tree is going to get. So we're probably familiar with big old trees, and later on this afternoon, we'll talk about some big old trees. And we're really not interested in planting those anymore. These days, we're focused on dwarfing trees. And the way we get dwarfing trees is by planting trees on a dwarfing rootstock. And there's a bunch of different dwarfing rootstocks out there. And some of these catalogs have some information about that. And so in going through these steps, there's various nurseries and brokers out there. And so really you want to choose one that has a good reputation. Maybe one that you already have prior experience with. You formed a relationship with them. And that's the best way to do business with them, is that now there's a relationship, there's some trust that's been established, and you know that they're going to provide good quality trees. If something goes wrong, you know they're going to stand by it. And so that's the best way. if you don't have a nursery that you've dealt with, talk to some other growers. And other growers will say, oh, I ordered from this nursery and I'd recommend them. Or perhaps they'll say, I ordered from this nursery and I wouldn't recommend them. But to get the experience of others can be useful. The cultivar, we talked a bit about cultivars. And so you want to plant cultivars so you have some that are early ripening, some that are mid-season, and some that are late season. So not all your apples are going to ripen at the same time. So you've got apples ripening throughout the season. And really, you don't want to plant cultivars that are yesterday's news. You know, people can go to the supermarket and buy those easily. And so plant something that's novel and new and interesting. And there are a bunch of new varieties out there that fall in that category. And those sort of novel and interesting and new cultivars give consumers a really good reason to come to your farm and buy your Pixie Crunch or your Wine Crisp or whatever it might be, or your Ludacrisp, because it's something different, it's something interesting, it's something different to what they can get from the regular stuff in the store. Rootstocks, we talked about rootstocks, and I've put down here, don't be on the cutting edge. Well, what do I mean by that? I think with cultivars, we do want to be on the cutting edge. We want to be on the new and interesting. The rootstocks, no customer is going to come to your farm and ask what kind of rootstocks you use. They don't care. That's something that you figure out for your farm that's going to work best for you. And so I think to be on the cutting edge is taking a risk that you don't need to take, because sometimes these rootstocks come out, there are new rootstocks, and there's some great new rootstocks. Many of them have some, there's no perfect rootstock. Many of them have problems. And so, I would advise against being the one to find out what problems they have. If you sort of go with not yesterday's news, but sort of rootstocks that have been proven a little more, I think makes sense. And there's some information about rootstocks available from NC 140, from the International Fruit Tree Association, have information on that as well. Tree quality. When you order trees, you can get trees that are 3/8" caliper, 1/2" caliper, 5/8" caliper, 3/4, all this kind of stuff. And generally, the bigger the tree, the more it's going to cost you. But I would say that you want to order the best quality tree that you can find. And if it costs you 50 cents more per tree or $1 per tree more, I think that's a really good investment, because those bigger trees typically tend to get up and going quicker, and they'll come into cropping sooner, which means you get a return on your investment sooner. So the other thing that's needed here is a good crystal ball. Because when you plant trees, this is not like planting a field of corn where you're going to plant it one year and next year you make a decision, and maybe you make a different decision. When you plant these trees, you're going to have them in the ground for 20 years maybe. And so, and they're not going to start cropping. You're not going to have serious production for probably 5 years. And so what you're trying to guess at is not what is most popular with my customers today, but what's going to be most popular with my customers 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now. That's the crystal ball aspect of this. And I don't pretend to have the answer to that, but I do know that we need to look forward and think about, okay, what direction are these trends in society heading? And what do I think that people are going to be looking for in 5 or 10 years time? And my guess is that in 5 or 10 years time, we're going to see a continuation of the trends that we're currently seeing. People are going to look for outside and fun and nostalgic kind of things to do with their families. And part of that is visiting a U-pick operation or another farm where they can pick apples, where they can go for a wagon ride, where they can go to the petting zoo, or all this kind of stuff that we sell at our operations typically. And part of that is having apples that are interesting to them, and apples that are different from the store. And so one of the great things about an apple like Pixie Crunch, for instance, which I think is a real winner for farm markets. One of the things that's great about Pixie Crunch, it's really too small to be a supermarket apple. And so people are not going to be able to buy that in the supermarket. Gold Rush is a great apple, but it's too ugly to be in the supermarket. It's just not pretty enough. And so we're not going to see Gold Rush on a supermarket shelf, I would guess, ever. And so that's something that you can offer at your farm market that a supermarket's never going to be able to offer. And so it gives a real draw card to consumers to come to your operation. And so that's my crystal ball, but you need to come up with make what makes sense to you and where you think things are headed in the future. So these are our old trees from yesteryear, okay? And we've all kind of seen orchards like this in our past. Maybe some of us still have trees like this at some of our orchards. I don't know. But these are trees that we used to see, the big old trees, and they are not very productive on a per acre basis. The fruit quality wasn't the greatest. They're certainly not very labor efficient. And so not the sort of trees that we want to be planting today. And you can see the tree spacing here. One of these are maybe 30 feet apart, something like that. And so not the kind of system we want to plant today. This is the kind of system where I think that we need to be. And this is closer to it, that's for sure. And these are smaller trees, dwarfing trees, planted much closer together, where most of the fruit can be picked from the ground. And the fruit quality is better, the yields are better, certainly the labor efficiency is better, and the suitability for U-pick is also better. These big old trees, like we saw before, most people can't conduct U-pick in an orchard like that because people want ladders, they want to climb to the top, all that kind of stuff, liability risk. There's a whole lot of reasons why that doesn't fit in our systems today. Whereas a system something like this, where we have small trees planted close together, dwarfing rootstocks, keeping those trees small, this is where we're heading and where we want to be. And certainly rootstocks make a tremendous difference in tree size. This is a photo, this was taken a long time ago at Ohio State when I was there. And here on the left, I don't know if you can see, there's a small tree on the left. See that little bitty tree? And next to it is a tree maybe 3 or 4 times as big. Well, these are both Red Delicious trees, and they're both planted at exactly the same time. And after, I don't know, 10 or 12 years, you can see how small some trees are and how big other trees are. This is the rootstock effect. So you can certainly see how big an effect the rootstock has. And so you want to be careful about your choice of rootstock right from the beginning. This is why you need to be careful about your choice of rootstock. Sometimes rootstocks can look like they're going well. And here's a tree and it's grown for 2 or 3 years in the orchard. Looks like it's going well. We had a windstorm and it broke at the Union. And you can see it's a clean break. But the thing that's interesting about this is that it grew just fine for a few years. And so this is why I'd say don't be on the cutting edge of the latest, greatest rootstock. Let them be tested for a while before you put them in your orchard. So next thing is preparing the site. And I think before you plant trees, you want to get a soil test. And certainly your county extension educator can help with that. And you can get that soil test sent off. And we're not going to go through all the intricacies of soil tests today, but probably the most important number on the sheet that you're going to get back, and it's going to have a lot of numbers all over it. The most important one, in my opinion, is the pH. And the reason why that is so important is that you can adjust it before you plant your trees. But after you plant your trees, it's really difficult to adjust your pH of the soil. And so you want to shoot for a soil pH of 6.7, 6.8, somewhere around there. And certainly your county extension person can help you with figuring out, if you need to lime or what treatments are necessary. But to be able to apply treatments to adjust the pH, incorporate those treatments in the soil before you plant your trees is really important. However, it's not just the soil test that's important in preparing the site. There are other things about your site that you also want to prepare or you also want to consider. Drainage. Most fruit trees don't like sitting in standing water. certainly not for very long. And, you know, an acre of orchard is a high dollar investment, much higher investment than row crops. And so you want to plant your orchard on your best ground. And often that'll be your most well-drained ground. And so pay attention to drainage, because if you don't, you're gonna run into problems with that throughout the life of the orchard. Another thing that we can run into sometimes is hard pans. And these might be down in the soil a little bit, where they're going to impede the percolation of water through the soil. And so if we can break those up before planting or address those, that's going to be in our best interest. Air drainage is important. What do I mean by air drainage? Well, cold air kind of flows like water, and it flows downhill. And so in the winter, when we have cold weather, we can have cold air and it can flow down a slope. And so we want to make sure that there's a way, if we're on a slope, to allow that cold air to drain away from our site so it doesn't sit on our site and cause damage. This is especially a problem in the spring. The spring is when we're particularly vulnerable to frosts and cold conditions during flowering. And so good air drainage can certainly benefit us at that time. Proximity to market. You know, think about your site and how close it is to your market, assuming you're going to have a market on your farm. And I'm not saying your orchard needs to be right next to your market. Sometimes there could be an advantage in having it a little ways away, so you can offer a wagon ride from the orchard to the market and make that part of the experience that you're selling. And so that's certainly something you'd want to consider. And you know, I'd plan the whole thing out before I did anything. Okay, I'm going to have my market here, going to have my orchard over here, I'm going to have roads over there, I'm going to have vegetables over here. Plan it out ahead of time, so it all fits together, because we're talking about a long-term investment. And access, we need to have access to our orchard. And so, are there access roads? Are we going to put some tracks in? What are we going to do with that? And so this is all part of the planning process that we need to get right from the beginning. So then we're going to plant our trees. So we order our trees. Our trees are most likely, you're not going to go to the local nursery and pick up trees. You're going to order trees from a catalog or from a website, and they may be shipped from Pennsylvania or New York or Washington or Missouri, some other place, most likely. And they're going to arrive in a box like this. And so here we have bare rooted trees. They're wrapped up, they're kept moist in moist sawdust, and I would leave them in that until you're ready to plant. If you take them out, they're probably going to dry out. And I'd store them in a cool place, but not a real cold place. So not where they're going to get too cold, but obviously not in the sun either. And so then we're going to get ready to plant our trees. Well, there's a different way to plant trees. On the left is something that's pretty common in Indiana, where we have an auger or a post hole digger behind a tractor. This is kind of like a big wine corkscrew that drills the holes. We mark them out ahead of time, and it drills the holes, and we plant a tree in each hole. And using that, we can plant trees pretty efficiently and pretty quickly. Of course, it depends on how many trees you have to plant. If you have 20 trees to plant, maybe you just dig the holes by hand. If you've got 200 trees to plant, maybe you want to borrow or rent something like this. On the right-hand side is a tree planter. And if you have 2,000 or 5,000 trees to plant, using one of these, you can plant a lot of trees in short order. You're probably going to have to buy one of these. There's not many of these that you can borrow or rent. But certainly you can plant a lot of trees in one day if you're going to be on a large scale. In Indiana, mostly we're on a fairly small scale, so we're probably going to be over on the left-hand side with a postal auger drilling one hole at a time. That's probably going to be most appropriate for most of our operations. When you're planting trees, you need to make sure you plant them. First of all, identify the graft union, right? The graft union is where the scion and the rootstock will join together in the nursery. Remember those trees that you buy from the nursery, these ones in this box back here, these trees are already grafted. And I don't know if you can see my cursor on the right-hand side, but this is the graft union, right? And so at that point, you want to identify that graft union. And when you plant those trees, make sure that graft union is about 6 inches out of the soil, right? It needs to be clearly out of the soil. And if you pay attention to that at planting time, that's really going to pay big dividends for you later on. And so make sure you plant trees that have that graft union clearly out of the soil, like we see in this photo. And this is a tree that's maybe 2 or 3 years old, but here you can see the graft union quite clearly. And let me talk about one of the problems if you don't do that. So here's a planting of trees on dwarfing rootstocks, and they all look nice, except for down the row. See this huge tree in sort of the middle to left-hand side? There's a huge tree there that's really vigorous, growing lots of vegetative shoots, not producing much fruit, but it's about twice as big as any other tree in that orchard. And so that's a big problem because it shades and it impedes the trees around it. And typically, if we find those trees, this is what the problem is. It's called Scion Rooting. This is where the trees are planted too deeply in the soil. The soil is covering the graft union, and we have roots coming out of the scion and into the soil. These roots bypass the dwarfing rootstock effect, so we no longer have the dwarfing effect. So this tree is now a vigorous tree, not a dwarfing tree. And so it's going to grow like crazy. It's going to be very vegetative, and it's not going to be very productive for us. And so once we get into this situation, there aren't many good options for dealing with it. The best option is the easiest one, and that's to avoid the problem in the first place, right? By planting the tree so that graft union's out of the soil. And so a little bit of extra time at planting time and a little bit of extra care at planting time can really avoid a lot of problems later on. And remember, we've got going to have these trees in the ground for 20 years. And so we need to make sure that we get it right from the start. And so we also want to have tree support, okay? Very important with dwarfing rootstocks. And so with dwarfing rootstocks, tree support is not something that's nice to have. It's not an optional extra. It's absolutely required. Because one of the things that dwarfing rootstocks do is they put most of their energy into producing fruit. And they put less energy into producing a lot of strong branches and a big, strong root system. So they don't have that. And so when those trees start to crop, they produce a lot of fruit. They've got a small root system, so they could easily tip over in the wind without tree support. So that's why we need tree support on these dwarfing rootstocks. And so this tree support really needs to go in at the time you plant the trees, right? Right from square one. Right from the beginning, you need to put in the tree support. And there's different kinds of tree support that can be successful. And so here we have some with metal stakes. Down in the bottom left, we have some with wooden posts. Then we see a trellis system. And here we see conduits that are not doing their job. Okay, so here's a conduit by each tree. You see the tree's bent over, but the conduit's bent as well. If we have a wire joining all those conduits together, that adds a lot more strength to the system. But certainly, support system needs to go in at the onset. And I've had the discussion before with growers. Well, how strong of a support system do I need? And their support system, do I need this size stake or that size stake? And my response has always been, well, the cost of a support system not doing its job is really high, right? Like we see in the top right photo here with this conduit, right? It's not doing its job. And so, yeah, we might have saved a little bit of money on our support system, but it's costing us a lot in terms of our orchard development. If we pay a little extra for our tree support and we get a support that we know is going to stand up and hold that tree up, then that's probably money well spent, I think. But yeah, so there's a lot of different solutions to this problem, but the right answer is adequate tree support right from the get-go. One other thing that many growers do that seems to be quite successful is here we see a tree. We see a metal stake by the tree, and they put some gravel around the base of the tree. And this can do a couple of things. It can help bed that tree into the soil and help prevent sort of rocking in the wind. And the other thing it does it helps reduce rodent damage. And so where we have bare ground like this, especially if we have some gravel around the base of the tree, we often have less rodent damage. I don't know if they don't like walking on the stones or what the deal is, but it seems to reduce rodent damage. But you've got to have bare soil for that, which is something that we want to have. So here's a young planting, and we see tree wraps. See these wraps around the trunks of the trees here? And these are made of some sort of plastic vinyl material that we wrap around, and we leave them on the trees for the first couple of years, and then we take them off. And they can prevent rodent damage or damage from rabbits eating the trees. But also when we're spraying our herbicide, they protect the trunk of the tree from herbicide. So once the trees get more than about 2 years old, we don't really need these anymore, and the trees can do just fine. But at the beginning, often they're a pretty good idea. So training and pruning trees. And so let's talk about this for a moment. And so the two biggest pruning mistakes that we often see in orchards is pruning young trees too much and pruning older trees too little. So the older trees, I'm going to kick that question down the road for about 40 minutes from now, and we'll talk about that. But pruning young trees too much. And I've highlighted at the bottom here, pruning delays the time to first cropping. And so it's very tempting for growers to plant their trees and they want to go and prune on that tree. You know, they've got their little puppy and they want to play with it. Okay, I get that. But the more you prune that young tree, the more you're going to delay the time to when it first starts to come into cropping. And so our focus in the first few years should be on tree training, more tree training and less tree pruning. And so work with the branches you've got and train them to where you want them to be. And often this involves spreading down branches such as we see here. And there's a bunch of different spreaders that you can use. And so this first one sort of made out of a heavy wire that the grower has made, and these work pretty well. This is a plastic spreader that you can buy, and you can buy these in different lengths. And the idea is when those branches are small, you're going to bend those branches down so they're at an angle about 30 degrees above the horizontal. And that reduces vegetative growth. It promotes flowering and fruiting, and it also lets more light into the tree. So it's a good thing to do all around. But the time to do that is when the branches are small, when they're about the caliper of your finger or so. That's the time to do it. And so here's some plastic spreaders. Here's some wooden spreaders that we often see. And you can see this branch at the bottom here. You can see it's at a nice angle now because we have the spreader on, okay? And so emphasis on tree training using our spreaders here is a really good idea rather than tree pruning. And here's spreaders, a lot of spreaders on this tree. I don't know if I'd put this many in, but certainly it can be done, and they're quite quick to do, and they have a really good effect on our tree development. And so when we have younger trees, so these trees are probably, I'm guessing, maybe 3 years old, something like that. On young trees like this, minimal pruning, okay? I'm not saying no pruning, but minimal pruning. We don't want to go and chop them too much. And so in these trees, I would probably do just 1 or 2 little cuts per tree, not very much. Don't try to manicure the tree and get it looking perfect. There's time for that later on. But at this stage, we want to have minimal pruning so that tree settles down and starts to produce fruit. And so a tree like this, okay, seems to be growing well. It's probably a 2 or 3 year old tree, but maybe a 3-year-old tree. But the thing is, these branches are way too steep. And so I on a tree like this, I wouldn't do a lot of pruning. I would try to do some spreading and see if we can get those branches down. It may be a little late, but I think it's worth a shot to try to bend those branches down. That way I can keep those branches and get that tree looking a lot better. So here's a young tree, and shortly after planting, and this is sometimes when you plant a tree, you'll get a tree with a few little side branches on it, and that's great to have. We call that a feathered tree because it's kind of got these branches that are like little feathers on it. And so we have these small branches on this tree, and on a tree like this, I would not touch it because this is a really nice looking tree to me. And so I think this tree is going to be off to a really good start. And also what we see in the base of this tree, the grower has painted the base of the tree white. And maybe this is to protect from winter injury, but they've also got a metal cage around the tree to protect from rodents or rabbits and things like that. And so I think this is a really nice setup, a really nice looking tree, well managed, well taken care of. I wouldn't prune it at all. I'd just leave it and keep it going in the right direction. Here's a tree that's been headed, okay? You can see the top of the tree. I don't know if you can see my cursor there, but that tree's been headed, it's been cut off. And this is a pretty standard practice in the industry and not a practice I particularly would recommend. And growers have been doing this to young trees for many years. And so why do growers do this? Growers do this because by taking off the top of the tree, and if you were sitting in my plant physiology course, I could tell you all about apical dominance. But what happens is when you cut off the top of the tree, then it forces some of those side branches to grow out and forces the development of them. But as we saw from the previous shot, often we'll get plenty of side branches without that. And this is a much less disruptive approach to tree development. And so certainly this can be done. I don't think it's a good idea. I think you're better off not to head the tree and allow the branches to come. And I think that'll work. There are some techniques with growth regulators that you can spray on those branches to encourage them to grow out if they're hesitant. But I think in many cases we can develop young trees and young orchards without heading like this. And so hopefully we get an orchard something like this. You can see, if you look near the ground, you can see the graft union of some of these that's clearly 6 inches out of the soil, just where we want it. We've got our tree support in, we've got our trees growing, and everything's looking good. And these trees have probably had a year in the orchard and looking like they're developing really well. Again, a picture of young trees. I think these are probably 3-year-old trees. Growing very well. Here, our tree support, we've got a conduit by each tree, and we've got a wire at maybe 6 feet or so that are joining all those trees together, or joining all the conduits together, and providing a lot more strength to our system. These trees are growing well. They've been well trained and developing just looking really good. So I would be very happy with an orchard looking like this at this stage. And I wouldn't go in and prune it very much. If there was a branch that was way too steep, I'd probably put a spreader on it and try to bend it down if I could. But not very much pruning required in trees like this. Best to leave them alone, let them fruit, and then we'll tidy them up afterwards. Again, if you look near the ground, you can see the graft unions clearly out of the soil. So obviously this grower has paid really close attention to that and done a good job. And so I think this is something for us to shoot for, is to have young orchards that look something like this. And these trees are planted fairly close together, dwarfing rootstocks. Just a lot of good things to see here, and good weed control around the trees. Okay, see the bottom of the trees? We don't have any weeds around the bottom of the trees, and that does a number of things. It prevents competition for water and nutrients, but also weeds provide good environment for rodents and other pests. And so by keeping it bare, we tend to reduce a lot of those problems. And so another thing, this grower is doing well. Okay, another youngish orchard, maybe 4 or 5-year-old trees here. And these trees are looking good. About the only thing I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this tree in the middle, it's got a branch coming out and it's going up at about 45 degrees. And that branch to me is just looking way too strong in that tree. So if I was going to prune anything, maybe I'd prune that branch out, or better still, if I could put a spreader on it and bend it down, that would be better still, if that was still possible. Sometimes if you leave it too late, those branches are just too thick and too strong, and you can't bend them down. They're just not going to move. But the time to put the spreaders in is in the spring, when the sap's flowing. The branches are typically a bit more flexible at that time of the year. So here's a pretty nice looking tree. You see these branch angles are pretty flat. I would think this grower's probably used a lot of spreaders in the past. But if you look near the top of the picture, you can see a branch coming out that's going up really steeply. And this branch is probably 1 inch in diameter. You're not going to be able to bend that down. And so my pruning, I would take that branch right out and just remove that branch. And that's probably all the pruning I'd do on that tree. Just remove those problematic branches and pretty much leave the rest of it. The rest of it looks good to me because I want to get some fruit off this tree and start getting a return on my investment. Okay, another couple of trees from a similar age. And on the tree on the left, you can see this strong branch coming up. And that would be the one that I would take out. I'd take that branch out. My pruning's done. On the right-hand side, probably the same thing. You can see another branch coming out very steeply there. I'm going to take that branch off and my pruning's done. I'm going to walk on to the next tree. Are there other cuts that could be made? Yeah, there's always other cuts that could be made. But I want to reduce the number of cuts I'm making on a young tree because I want that tree to start fruiting. And so hopefully we get into a situation like this. And so here's a tree, it's probably 5 years old. And so once those branches get too big, we're going to remove those branches out close to the trunk, and we're going to leave another, that'll usually stimulate the growth of another shoot that we're going to keep for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years until it gets too big, and then we're going to take it out. And that way our tree is made up of these smaller branches. Notice all these small branches coming off the trunk, and these are very highly fruitful branches. So they're going to produce a lot of fruit, and when they get too big, we take them out and we've got another small one. And so it makes the pruning, number one, makes the pruning very simple, but also very effective because we're leaving these highly productive small branches in the tree. And this is what these trees look like when they get a bit older. You can see this trunk is getting bigger, but our fruiting branches are still small. And if you look on the trunk, you can see a lot of branches being taken out over the years on this tree. But still the canopy of this tree, even though this tree is getting older, the canopy of this tree is still young because we have all these young branches. And these branches tend to be our very fruitful branches. Okay, so now we're up to managing our crop load. And once these trees start fruiting, then we want to, we want to harvest some fruit and make some money off them. But we don't want to get into a situation, and this is a poor picture, and I apologize for that, but I think you get the idea. Here's a young tree that is way overcropped. And this is a real problem for young trees that we overcrop them. Sometimes we can stunt the growth of that tree, and it can be a real bear to get that tree growing again. And so be careful on young trees that we don't get carried away when they start to crop and we overcrop them. We certainly don't want to get in that situation. And the last one, or the second to last one on our list here, is control our pests. And so even though trees might not be producing fruit, there's still some pests that attack the trees that we need to spray for. And I think in next week, or I think next week, we're going to have another seminar in this series looking at pest control and talking about the spray guide. But certainly controlling pests is very important on young trees. And one of the pests that we often don't think about is deer. And deer can be a real problem for many places in Indiana. Here is the ultimate, a big deer fence like this. This would be nice for us all to have something like this, but often this is cost prohibitive. And so some of the things that growers might do that are short of a deer fence like this, but still might help, is some people will hang soap from a tree. There's little hotel room, little bars of soap. Just drill a hole through the middle and put a little string in it and hang it from the tree. And apparently the scent from it helps dissuade deer. And it might be a small electric fence, a portable electric fence that might help. If you have a dog in the orchard, that'll help. You can buy poop from the lions at the zoo, or urine from the big cats at the zoo, and put that around your orchard. And apparently the smell of that helps dissuade deer as well. So there's a few other approaches, but and maybe for your site it's not a problem, but certainly something to be aware of. And so one of the pests that we often don't think about is weeds. And so we talked a little bit about weed control, but here's a young orchard with the weeds totally out of control. And it's probably setting back this orchard maybe a year at this point with all these weeds that are competing with the trees. And so this is a situation we want to try to avoid. And hopefully we are in this situation where we're producing so much fruit that we can't keep our feet on the ground, and then we're counting the money at the end. And so I think that's my, I've got a couple of summary slides, and then we can take a couple of questions on young trees. Then we're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk about older trees. So let me go through these summary here. So we need to prepare, okay? We need to order trees and prep the site, and we need to do this ahead of time. Not like, oh, I want to plant next week. Maybe I should take a soil test this week. No, you need to plant significantly ahead of time. In the early years, focus on tree training, the use of our spreaders to bend our branches into place. Minimal pruning in the first couple of years. Small trees are babies, so we want to baby them. So what do I mean by that? I mean, we want to take care of them. Make sure we control the weeds, make sure we control the pests, tree support, all those things to take care of them. And early investments pay off. So investment in planting the tree carefully to make sure we don't have scion rooting, to make sure we put in our tree support that's appropriate right from the beginning. And so that's my last slide for young trees. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop my slide share here, hopefully. And if folks have questions about young trees, young tree management, we can take a few questions. So if you have those, you can either type them into the chat window, or you can unmute your microphone and we can take those.
Peter, there was a question in the chat box about painting tree trunks. Is that recommended?
Oh, yeah, good question. Thanks for bringing that up, Jeff. Painting tree trunks can be a good idea. But when you paint them, make sure you use water-based paint. Do not use oil-based paint. That'll cause tremendous injury to the tree. And so use water-based paint and a light-colored paint. And the whole idea is during winter, on days like today. Okay, I'm looking out my window here, and it's snowing right now, and there's no sun. But in the next couple of days, we could get sunny weather. And so what's going to happen is the temperatures are cold, but we have sun. And so because the sun shines on the bark, it can heat up the bark during the day, and during the night, it can re-radiate that heat. And so you have these huge fluctuations in temperature of the bark, and that can cause the bark to split open. So by painting the trees, what it does, it reflects that sunlight during the day, so the trunk just stays cold day and night, so we don't have these fluctuations in temperature. So it can certainly help from that. And often it's called southwest injury because we tend to get it more on the southwest side of the tree, because that's where we get most of our sunlight from. There's a question here about raising older trees. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. And so, yeah, we'll be talking about taking out older trees and planting younger trees. We'll talk about overgrown trees. We'll talk about that as well. One of the questions here is, can you plant multiple species of fruit trees in the same orchard? Yes, you can, but you want to try to keep your apples together, your peaches together, your different kinds together, because you're going to spray them differently. And so often you'll be spraying most of your apples with something similar at the same time, and most of your peaches and most of whatever else, blackberries or whatever else you might be growing. And so you don't want to mix them up, because then it makes just logistics, not just with spraying, but with harvest and other management strategies, makes it pretty difficult. Other questions?
I have a question, Peter.
Yes, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, and some of the, okay, I'm going to put New York up there as an example. Some of the growers up there are encouraged to train their limbs below the horizontal. I just can't see that, because the fruit, when it matures, is going to get heavier and even drag those down. And then it's hard to get a herbicide spray underneath it. And the Food Safety Modernization Act doesn't like you to pick apples up off the ground, and sometimes that's where they're going to end up. So I'm with you on the 70-degree or 30-degree, angle. I don't see this bending that low. I tried it and I regretted it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sarah. I think, if we think about what happens to a branch, okay, when an apple branch grows straight up, it tends to grow very vigorously and doesn't want to fruit very much. As we bend that branch down flatter and flatter, it tends to grow less and fruit more. And so by keeping that in mind, now we can devise a strategy for our particular operation, and maybe one variety versus a different variety, but we can manage it so we can manipulate the tree to do what we want it to do. And so if we have some trees that are growing pretty vigorously, maybe we want to bend those branches down pretty flat to reduce the growth and increase the fruiting. And and maybe some other varieties are not growing very strongly, we'd like them to grow a little more, maybe we'd let those get a little bit steeper and not bend them so much. As for bending below the horizontal, certainly in the bottom part of the tree, I think in the bottom part of the tree, that's not a good idea, because to have access for your herbicides is just, you can't do that when you've got branches in the way. That's not a good idea. And keeping fruit off the ground, that we definitely want to keep our fruit off the ground. And so I think our bottom branches, we want to not have branches that are coming out 6 inches above the ground. We want to have them at least 2 feet above the ground. And we want to have them heading upwards, not downwards, I would think. And so I don't know why someone would train branches below the horizontal, especially in the bottom part of the tree. But flattening branches and training branches and spreaders, I certainly get that. That makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
There was a question from the chat about mulching. Mulching can be a good idea, but, and here's the but we need to be careful about putting too much mulch around the tree, because it can create a nice environment for mice and other critters in the orchard that can then cause damage to our fruit trees. And so if you are going to put mulch around the trees, which can be a way to keep down the weeds, we don't want them too close to the trunk of the tree, just from a pest control point of view.
This is Sid.
Hi there, go ahead, Sid.
When you talked about putting trees together that were consistent, for some of the apple trees, don't you have to have other ones that pollinate better to get better production? Yeah,
good point. Thanks for raising that, Sid. So the way that we typically do it in an orchard is we'd plant a row of Gala, let's say. And so now they're all going to be ripening at the same time. We're going to spray them all at the same time. That's good. And so maybe we'll plant 2 or 3 rows of Gala. Then we'll plant a few rows of Fuji or Honeycrisp or something else, with the idea that one variety will pollinate the other one. And certainly with apples, we need cross-pollination. Okay, apples will not pollinate themselves. And so most varieties will pollinate most other varieties. So if you're planting an orchard and you're planting several different varieties of apple, then chances are that they're all going to pollinate each other. But you'd want to plant all the same kind within a row just to make management easier. And so typically the maximum number of rows of one kind that you want together is about 5. And then you want to plant 5 rows or 4 rows of something else, just so as the bees fly around the orchard, they're transferring the pollen from one to another. So generally about 5 rows of one variety together is about the max that we want to go, just to encourage cross-pollination. But yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for raising that, Sid. Other questions?
I'll make one other comment.
Yeah.
For spreaders, if you get lath that was used in plaster, those make great spreaders because you can just notch them, cut them the length you want, notch them, and those make great spreaders.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. You know, it's interesting. There's always some innovative solution that someone comes up with to a problem. So sharing those is pretty good. Okay, we have a few other questions, but mostly they relate to mature trees. So what we're going to do, we'll move to the second part of this and talk about older trees and how to take care of them. And then if there's questions about older trees and taking care of them, we can talk about it at that point. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so here we're going to talk about older trees, and maybe not older trees like this one that we see. This tree is pretty old, and hopefully we don't have too many trees like this still around, although they are kind of beautiful in their own way. But as far as a producing orchard, this is not the ideal, that's for sure. But often we can breathe new life into old trees and have them become productive again. And so this is sort of my scheme and my way of thinking about the past, present, and the future in terms of apple trees. So in the past, we see on the left here, we see this gigantic tree. This is the way that the way it used to be done, right? We'd have these very large trees. We have them planted 30 or 40 feet apart. And our orchard was kind of like a park, and it was beautiful. And that's what we remember as kids. But pruning and spraying and managing these trees is really difficult and time-consuming and labor-intensive. So we moved away from that. So in the present, we have these dwarfing rootstocks, sort of an axis kind of a system. Trees may be planted, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 feet apart, and producing a tree maybe from 6 to 8 to 9 feet tall, where most of the fruit can be harvested from the ground. The future, well, okay, this is a bit of a guess, right? Because who knows what the future is going to hold. But I think kind of a tall spindle kind of an orchard like this, where we have, you know, maybe 800 or 1,000 trees per acre, and these trees are planted maybe 3 feet apart, but they're going to be a bit taller. Maybe they'll be 9 feet tall. With the only permanent branch is the main trunk of the tree. And so I see this is the way that we're probably going in the future. But still, even though our trees of the future may look like this, our orchards right now are mostly comprised of trees that were planted in the past, and so look like in the past or the present categories here. And so when we have older systems like this, older orchards, what are some of the characteristics of these older plantings? Well, because they're old trees, they're old varieties, right? And so if they have 30-year-old trees, the variety is probably what was popular 30 years ago. And in many cases, that's going to be different to what's most popular today. So we have to live with our older varieties, and that's not something we can easily change. The other thing about these older orchard plantings, they intercept less sunlight. So there's a lot more sunlight that falls on the ground because they're planted wide apart, and they're less productive because of that. They also have a lot of shade within the tree. Look within those tree canopies, it's very shaded on the inside. Therefore, we have a lot of fruit of poorer fruit quality. And so the quality is not as good. We need a lot of ladders or some sort of picking or some sort of elevation method to get to the tops of these trees, to prune them, to harvest them. And so a lot more labor is required. To get good, when we spray, we want good coverage of our spray materials on all the leaves on the trees. And with trees like this, because they're very tall and because they're dense, it's hard to get that uniform coverage across the whole tree. So often our pest and disease control is not as good. And the last thing about and because of all of these factors really, is our production costs tend to be a bit higher with these trees. And so I think this is your best option with trees like this, okay? And people are going to look at me and say, well, that's a little bit drastic. But no, I think with orchard systems like this, this is your best option. And I don't think there's much debate about that. This is the best option. But the question is when do you do that? Can we get a few more years out of them? Should I do it right now and pull them all out? If I've got a few old trees like this, should I replace a few at once? How do I do this? That's the real question, I think. It's not whether we need to replace these old trees with new ones. Yes, we do. It's a matter of timing about how do we do this and when do we do this. And so I would say if your time frame is less than 3 years, yeah, I've got new trees ordered. I'm going to take these out. I'm going to prepare the site for them, and I'm going to do that in 2024. So in 2 years' time. In that case, if it's less than 3 years away, I would say just keep doing what you're doing now with these old trees. Don't worry about doing anything different with them because we've got a better plan anyway. We're going to replace them with a new orchard system, with new varieties, with new rootstocks, with different planting system. We've got a plan for that. If our time frame is more than 10 years away, okay, I'm going to keep these in the ground for at least 10 more years. My question would be, why? Why do we want to keep them that long? I don't think it makes any sense to keep trees like this that are inefficient, that are older varieties, that have higher production costs. I don't know why we would want to keep those more than 10 years. But if you're going to keep them maybe 3 to 10 years, maybe 5 years, and then replant, because I've got some young trees already in the ground, I'm going to wait for those to start cropping, then I'll get to replacing these old trees. Okay, that's something we can talk about today. And so if you're in this bottom category, maybe, and I would say maybe 3 to 10 years away from doing something with these trees, then we can talk about some strategies today to improve the production of those trees. So we have different forms of pruning for these trees. And some of you may have seen this, but a couple of years ago, I had some students and I sent them out to the farm and I said, make an educational video for growers about how to prune an apple tree. And they're like, oh, yeah, no problem. We can do that. And so off they went. And so this is what they came back with. So I'll let you be the judge of what you think about this. And so here's, this is Mark Lascelles, CC, and he's explaining that he's going to demonstrate pruning, and he's got a pruning saw in each of his boots, and he's going to explain how to best prune this tree. So that's how it's done, folks. Simple as that. I guess my students were being a bit creative that day. Okay, so let's get a bit serious again. And so here we have our tree on the left, and it shows that sort of our pyramid-shaped tree. It's our central leader. We've got a tree support there, and we've got kind of this pyramid Christmas tree shape where it's narrow at the top and it's wide at the bottom. And so in the old central leader days, it would look kind of like this tree on the right, okay? We have these tiers of branches. That's the way we used to do it. And this tree might be anywhere from 10 to 20 feet tall, perhaps, okay? And so that's how we'd like our trees to be. And when we put them all together in an orchard, the bottom of the trees pretty much meet up, so we're intercepting a lot of sunlight. The tops of the trees are narrow, so the light with the yellow arrows here can get down between the tops of the trees and they can reach the bottom part of the canopy where you get good productivity. Everything's all looking good. And so here's some trees, and this is from the Apple Works, some well-managed trees, semi-dwarf, older trees. They've got some size to them, but you can see the tree shape is still ideal, okay? We still have very narrow top and wide bottom to the trees, well-managed trees. And so here's another pruning video. You can see my video is nowhere near as much fun as my students, but hopefully it'll get the point across about pruning this tree. And here we are, and it's going to be, here's the tree before, and then it's going to look at the tree after. And so then I think it's going to show me pruning the tree, and I'm going around and they sped it up, and I'm kind of talking about it and pruning. And so around the tree we go, and we're taking branches out. And most of the branches I'm taking out, I'm either taking out a branch right at the trunk or a large piece of the branch. And so the bottom line here, this is what we started with. Look how dense those branches are. And look afterwards is that the tree looks kind of the same. It's just thinned out, right? And so this is it afterwards. And so the whole point, this tree is a well-managed tree. It's a good-looking tree, but it just needs thinning out of the canopy. And so there we've thinned it out to let light into the canopy. But the problem we often get into with older trees, there's two main problems we get into. One is we have umbrella trees, kind of like this one that we see here, where our tops of the trees, instead of being narrow, they become very wide. And so we have this wide tops of the tree, and they're shading the rest of the tree. And so I call these umbrella trees because the top's kind of like an umbrella shading the rest of the tree. The other problem we often see with older trees is our branches are too dense. We've got too many branches in there. And so it's shading the rest of the tree. And so this is what these trees look like when we all put them together. You can see rather than the light coming down between the tops of the trees, it's not possible anymore because the tops are too wide because we have these big umbrella branches in the top. Because of this, it's difficult for light to get to the bottom of the trees. So the bottom of the trees are shaded. It's shaded at the bottom, so it doesn't produce much fruit. And so all the vigor goes where the light is at the top. So the trees are growing like crazy at the top. Most of the fruit's at the top, and it's just not what we want at all. And that's what this is what these trees look like in practice. And so at the top, we have these branches. We see all this vigor going at the tops of the trees. Most of the fruit is up here where it's most expensive to harvest it. There's poor light distribution, not much fruit at the bottom of the tree. It's just a real problem. And one of the strategies that we often see is growers see all these branches at the top of the tree and think that's our problem. And they come in and they cut all those back. And the next year they just grow a bunch more. And the problem just perpetuates over time. And so, so in a system like this, yes, we can manage it, but not by addressing these branches at the top. Okay. And so, so this is what we see often in these trees at the bottom. In the inside of the tree, there's hardly any branches growing there, let alone fruit, because there's not much light that reaches there because the branches are too dense. And so this is a real problem because we have large parts of the tree canopy that are unproductive. So what do we use to address this, right? And pruning shears are just going to create problems. Loppers, yeah, maybe, but chainsaw is what we really need to really address this problem. And some of you have maybe seen this before, but this is where we address the problem. And the problem is those umbrella branches in the top part of the tree. And so here we cut those back and we get closer to a pyramid shaped tree again. We're not worried about all these branches in the top, these small branches. We're worried about these big structural branches that are maybe 3, 4, 5 inches in diameter. And so as a result of that, over time, we see that we have better quality fruit, larger fruit, and more fruit in the bottom part of the tree where it's less expensive to harvest it. And so all these changes can occur with this style of pruning. And so after we prune these trees, we get rid of some of these umbrella branches, we get close back to our pyramid shape and get the light into the tree. So that's all fine and good for these overgrown umbrella trees. So our apple pruning technique, and this bar on the left, this represents the trunk of the tree, okay? And here's a side branch coming out. It's bent down at the end because it's fruited for a few years. The fruit was heavy and bent that branch down. And so this is something typical that we see. So how do we prune this? Well, there's a very simple way to prune this, is that prune off these pieces on the bottom. So there's this big pendant branch right here, and this whole end of the branch here that's bent down, we can prune that off as well. So when we do that, this is what results. And the nice thing about this branch is we've pruned off most of the branches underneath where we have poor light and poor fruit quality and left the branches on top. The other thing about this is this branch creates a whole lot less shade for the branches down below it. And so, excuse me. And so this is old. This is in a book from 1992. And so we've known this for a long time. And yet often we don't see this put into practice as much as we could. And so this is a really useful technique. And so what I like about this technique, well, number one, it gets rid of our fruiting wood that gives us poor quality fruit. That's these branches in the bottom. And it leaves our branches that produce high quality fruit, those branches on top. But the other thing is It's really quick to do. The difference between these two branches, between this branch and this branch, is 2 cuts. We cut off this one branch here and this one branch here. So we did 2 pruning cuts and this whole branch is pruned. Whereas the temptation is to come in and snip it here and snip it there and snip it there and snip over here and spend a long time pruning that. But with 2 cuts, we can achieve a lot of good things. And the other problem we get into is these droppers or hangers, as they're sometimes called, but they're these branches coming out below the main branch. So all these branches hanging down here, and they produce poor quality fruit. They're never going to produce good quality fruit. And so this is what they look like close up. This is a hanger that's probably 8 or 10 years old, and the buds on it are weak. They're going to produce small fruit size. Typically, they're difficult to thin. There's just nothing good about these. And so to prune them out at pruning time just reduces a source of poor quality fruit that we don't want anyway. And so those are a no-brainer to remove those at pruning time. And so here are well-managed trees. And so here are some semi-dwarf trees. And there we are with our loppers, and we're pruning these trees, keeping them in good shape. You can see there's a couple of branches at the top. They're thinning it back to 1 clear leader and just thinning out the tree canopy a bit. Here are some pruning photos taken by my friend Jim Shoup at Penn State. And here is sort of a semi-dwarf axis style tree, pretty good looking tree. And if we look at before pruning and after pruning, you can see the basic structure of the tree hasn't changed. And what we've done, we've just thinned out the branches. And most of these have been branches that have been taken out at the trunk just to thin out the canopy a little bit. And so all the branches that are left are very young, highly fruitful kind of branches to make this a very productive tree, and not only productive, but high fruit quality. So the bottom line with pruning is to have high quality spurs. And I was in Ohio a couple of weeks ago, and I went to graduate school in Ohio and was fortunate to study with Dr. David Ferree. And you know, back in the day, David Ferree, he was the guy, one of the most famous pomologists in the world. And one of the things that Dave used to talk about a lot was spur quality. And this is 30 years ago now. And he talked about spur quality. Yeah, he didn't study gene expression or all the stuff that we talk about some of the times these days. But his big deal was we've got to get light into the tree to have high quality spurs, because that's how we have high quality fruit. And the more that I learn, the more that I realize that, man, he had it nailed. That's it. High quality spurs. That if we can have high quality buds like we see here, we're going to produce high quality fruit. And really, that's all you need to know. All of this other stuff about tall spindle, about branch angle, about hangers and droppers and umbrella trees and all the stuff we talk about, it all comes down to making sure we have high quality spurs in the tree, like we see here, because that's what's going to produce high quality fruit. So that's the thing to keep in mind. So if you remember one thing today, remember that we need to have high quality spurs and high quality buds, because that's going to give us high quality fruit. And all the rest are just strategies to help us achieve it. But this is our goal, okay? These high quality buds and high quality spurs on the tree. And this is why it's so important. Here's on the left with this is a gala fruit. This is a low quality spur, very poor quality spur. It's very weak. And the arrow is pointing to the Bourse bud. Okay, there's a tiny bud there that maybe you can't see, but that's the bud that has the potential to form our crop for next year. And so, you know, that could initiate a flower this year, that next year will produce a flower and produce a fruit for next year's crop. So this is what a weak on the left, this is a weak fruit, weak spur producing a small fruit and a very small Bourse bud that probably won't form a flower. On our right, and this is early season, this is also gala. Here's our Bourse bud. Look how strong that bud is. Look at the leaf area, the number of leaves, healthy leaves it's got around it. this is a very strong spur. And so because of this, first of all, this fruit, when it develops, is going to be a high quality fruit. It's going to produce something of high value for us. And number two, it's going to produce this boss bud that's a strong bud that'll probably flower for next year's crop. So when we have strong buds like this, we're less likely to have biennial bearing than we will when we have weak buds. And so there's a lot of reasons that we want to have these strong buds on the tree. And so another point to make is about the light and fruit quality. And keep an eye on this fruit in the middle of the photo. And we'll see what happens when this fruit, when we take this leaf away. Okay. See that fruit in the middle and the color on the fruit? And that's because that leaf has blocked the light, and without light on the surface of that fruit, it stayed yellow or green and it hasn't turned red. So we need light on the fruit to develop good red color. And this is a really good demonstration of that. And so to keep our trees open, so we get light, so we get good colored fruit, high quality fruit, fruit with good sugar content, all the things that we want to see certainly benefit us from getting light into the tree. And so here's a mature planting of these semi-dwarf trees, and a pretty decent looking orchard, although the tree on the left is starting to get pretty wide at the top. Okay, we're starting, I don't know if we have the true umbrella branch, but it's heading in that direction. The tree on the right looks much better because the top of the tree is very narrow. Therefore, we can get light to the bottom. We can maintain our productivity in the bottom part of the tree. So this tree on the left, we'd want to address this, and maybe just one or two big cuts at the trunk would take care of all this, and we'll get this tree into much better shape again. And the younger trees like this that maybe have not been managed well at all in the past present some problems for us. And we see this tree, it's just got about 1 million branches in there. And so the remedy to this situation is to try to reduce the number of branches that we have. So in this tree, I'd probably go in and take out a number of these, maybe 3 or 4 or 5. I'm going to take them out right at the trunk, just reduce the number of branches. On the remaining branches, I'm going to try my spreaders in the spring and see if I can bend those down flat and make a decent tree out of this. And the nice thing about apple trees is even a tree that has received maybe minimal management over the first few years and is headed in a pretty bad direction, such as we see here, there's hope for this and we can turn it around. And so I think by taking out a few branches at the trunk and doing some branch spreading, in the space of a couple of years, we can turn this into a pretty decent looking tree again. On a tree like this, that's maybe 50 feet tall, I'm guessing, hopefully this was in a park and not in an orchard, but it's one of the largest apple trees I think I've ever seen. On a tree like this, it's just too tall. How are you going to harvest the fruit in the top part of the tree? I just don't see, it's beautiful as an ornamental specimen, no question about that. But as far as a productive fruit tree, it's going to be very difficult because how are you going to get high enough to harvest the fruit on the top of the tree? How's your sprayer going to spray the top of the tree? And so as an ornamental specimen, it's beautiful. It's something very architecturally pleasing about this tree. But to try to produce a useful crop of fruit off this tree is going to be very difficult. Here we are back with these pyramid-shaped trees. And again, the grower has done a fantastic job with trees that are, I don't know, maybe 20 years old or something like that on M7 rootstock. The grower's done a great job of maintaining the pyramid shape. These look fantastic. And in some of the trees, like the one on the extreme right, we can see holes in the tree canopy that are useful for getting the light in. On some of these other trees, yeah, the overall shape of the tree is good, but they look pretty dense. And maybe it's just because they have too much vigor because they're on M7. I don't know. But that's certainly one of the challenges that we face in some of these semi-dwarf trees. Is we have a lot of vigor, and maybe it's just too dense in those trees to get light to the inside very well. So here's our old friend Tom Roney that we still remember, and here's Tom looking at an orchard, and did I prune too much? And so the temptation is to look at a tree and think about all the branches that you don't like the look of, and think, okay, I got to prune all these out today. Well, no, you don't need to prune them all out today. We're going to take some of them today, and we're going to take some of them next year. So we're not going to try to get the job all done at once. And so here's a few points to remember. Focus on the overall tree structure, okay? And so, so look at the overall structure of the tree, not every little limb. Make a few large cuts. So maybe 2 or 3 large cuts per year. And by large cuts, we may be talking 4-inch cuts or so, but only do a couple of these per year on the tree. So in the first year, you're going to take out the ugliest 2 or 3 biggest branches in the tree. The next year, you're going to take out the next 2 or 3 ugliest big branches. The year after that, you're going to say, well, there aren't any really ugly big branches left, so now I can focus on my detailed stuff more. So thinning out cuts rather than, and try to avoid heading. So thinning out cuts is where we're taking out a whole branch or whole piece of a branch. Remove droppers. We talked about droppers. And the old joke is that pruning is light work, and because it gets light into the tree. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's all about getting light into the trees. And because that's the best way to get those young, highly exposed, strong spurs like Dave Free talked about way back in the day. And here's the payoffs. This is what we get out of this. We get more fruit in the bottom half of the trees. And so makes a much more labor efficient system. We have larger fruit size. We have higher fruit quality. And so larger fruit size, higher fruit quality, that means increased value. But when we take out these large limbs, we are going to lower our yield for 2 or 3 years until we stimulate some younger, high quality spurs and get the yield going again. So we are going to drop our yield for a year or 2. We're going to have less biennial bearing. Why? Because we're going to have those stronger spurs that we talked about that tend to be less biennial. And we're probably going to have more effective pest control because our tree is going to be more open, and we're going to be better able to get our spray materials distributed evenly throughout our tree canopy. So there's our strategy for managing larger trees, okay? And some of the benefits of doing that. And so hopefully that makes sense to you. Hopefully there's some tips in there that you can apply to your particular orchard, and some useful things that you can take home with you. At that point, I'm going to stop my share screen, my screen sharing, and go to the questions and see if we have some questions about managing older trees.
Peter, can I ask a question here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the slide that you showed from Penn State, I think Jim Shoup maybe, yep. You had a before and after. And one of the major things that looked like to me that occurred is that there was a lot taken out between the lower branches and the top branches, say 4 or 5 feet off the ground. But I didn't see any scaffolding branches in there. Would you address keeping scaffolding? I mean, it seems like I remember being told to have a set of scaffolds about every 18 inches or so. I don't know. Some pomologist probably told me that when I first got started, but he wasn't very good anyway. So if you would address that, please.
Sorry, we're losing your connection, Perry. I didn't hear what you were saying. No, I'm just making a joke. So yeah, the old style of pruning trees was where we had a central leader and we had a bottom permanent scaffold of branches. And then we went up about 3 or 4 feet and we had another scaffold of semi-permanent branches. Then we went up another 3 or 4 feet, had another semi-permanent scaffold of branches. Our thinking's kind of evolved over time. And so our strategy for trees like that now is to have our bottom scaffold of branches, and they're about 3 or 4 feet off the ground. And they are on those branches, they're going to be permanent. And above that, we're not going to have any permanent branches. And so all our side branches, once they get too big, we're going to remove them and leave a weaker branch. And my sort of rule of thumb is anytime a branch above that gets more than about 1 inch in diameter, I'm going to think about removing it and leaving a smaller branch that's maybe 1/2 inch in diameter. And over the next 3 or 4 years, I'm going to fruit that branch and collect some really good quality fruit off it. And when it gets to inch and a half, something like that, I'm going to take that right out and leave the new ones again. And so in that case, we never get to have any heavy structure in the top half of the tree. And so it keeps the top half of the tree very light in terms of a lot of growth, and it doesn't block the light getting to the bottom part of the tree. And so, yeah, he's been in that situation, in that slide, he's been pretty aggressive at taking out the older branches and leaving the younger branches. But we are going to hang a lot of fruit on those younger branches. And so, so it's a different kind of approach to the way we used to do things. And in fact, taking it a step further, in terms of our tall spindle trees, that sort of our tree of the future, we don't even have a bottom scaffolder branches. We don't have any branches in the tree that are permanent except for the central leader itself. All those side branches, whenever they get to, I don't know, maybe an inch or so, we're going to take them off no matter where they are in the tree. And so, so our tree is totally composed. All these side branches are going to be small fruiting branches, maybe the size of your finger or something like that in diameter. And once they get to be too big, we're going to take it completely out and we're going to rely on the younger branches again. And so our thinking evolves over time and new systems come along. And, I'm sure 20 years from now, we'll have other advice on growing trees on ways that we haven't thought of right now. So things evolve over time. And so there was a question in the chat about when's the best time to prune old trees. And I would say that the best time to prune is when the trees are dormant, but after the risk of severe cold has passed. So when is that? I would say February and the early part of March is probably the best time. And so if you have a few trees, I would leave it to then to prune. But some people are going to say, well, I've got 2,000 trees. I can't prune them all in a month. I got to get going all winter. Okay, well, that's what you have to do. And so, so where you have too many trees that you can't prune them all in a short period of time, you prune over the winter. But when you keep an eye on the weather forecast, and when it's predicting, next week, single digit or below zero temperatures, then you stop pruning, because trees that you prune, even though they're dormant, you kind of wake them up a little bit. And when you wake them up a little bit, they get more sensitive to really cold temperatures. And so, so we don't want to prune today when it's forecast, 0 degrees, tomorrow or the next day. You wouldn't want to do that, because then there's a risk of those cold temperatures causing some damage in the tree. But if possible, prune in February or March, when the risk of those real cold temperatures is much reduced. Okay, I see another question there about vigorous growth on the tops of branches. And if you cut them off, they just regrow. And of course, the worst thing in the world that you can do is cut them in half, and then you get 2 branches where you cut it off. And so the best thing to do with those branches that are growing straight up, these are probably on older trees that have vigorous rootstocks. So that these trees are going to be high vigor trees, and that's just the nature of the rootstock that the trees are planted on. And so in that situation, you try to manage it by fruiting. And the best way to reduce the vigor of a branch is to hang an apple on it, because then it puts its energy into the apple rather than to growing more shoots. And so what do you do when you have all these shoots growing straight up at the top of the tree? Well, you take half of them right out. And so you never cut them in half. And so some of those shoots, they may have grown 3 or 4 feet in a year, maybe 6 feet in a year. And those, you take them right out of the base, and you take out every other one. And the other ones that you leave, they're going to start to produce fruit buds. And then they're going to fruit, and hopefully they'll still be skinny enough and flexible enough that when they fruit, they'll bend over. When they bend over, all the vigor's taken out of them, problem solved. Okay. But yeah, it does look pretty ugly. But take out every other one and leave the alternate ones to produce some fruit buds to take the vigor out. But yeah, it's always going to be a bit of an issue with these trees on high vigor rootstocks. And that I guess to be smart about it, You know, that's the reason we don't grow on trees on those old rootstocks anymore, because they're too high vigor for us. But as we've seen, there's some strategies for managing the vigor on those trees. There was a question about vole management, and we've certainly suffered from that at our farm at Purdue, and like many of you have seen that. And voles tend to nibble off the bark of the tree around the base, and if they go all the way around, they'll ring bark that tree and kill it. And so I think the best management strategy is to have the ground clear under the trees. Good weed control, to have bare soil under the trees. That's a really good way of doing it. One of the things that we did out at the Purdue farm was Tristan out there came up with a really nice solution, and he had PVC pipe, and he put the poison in it. I think is it zinc sulfide? I think it is. And he put the poison inside the PVC so birds couldn't get at it, because we don't want to kill a bunch of birds. And the voles would go inside, they'd eat the poison, and after that, paying attention to weed control and putting the poison out inside these little PVC pipes, that solved the problem for us. And so I'm not sure where Tristan came up with that solution, but it was very successful for us. So I see a couple of things in the chat. One is that there's a survey, and so we'd ask you to complete the webinar survey and give us some feedback. And so there's a link for that. So thanks, Petrus, for posting that. And also some information on the next fruit management webinar. It's on February 15th. And you can also earn PARP credits for that. So if you have a private applicator license and you need your recertification credits, you can get it for attending that webinar on February 15th. And there's information, if you go to indianahortconference.org, you can find out more information there as well. Oh, it says there was some drought stress in the past 2 years on 3 to 5 year old trees planted bare root, which haven't bloomed yet. Any hope? Yeah, I think where there's life in the trees, there's always hope. Maybe I'm an eternal optimist. But yeah, I think maybe that's on very light soil. This is not a problem we normally see on our heavier soils in Indiana. And so yeah, water the trees, don't fertilize, but water the trees if it is drought stress. And those trees should come away just fine. And so I would water them. And, I think that once the trees get going again, they'll produce flowers and you'll be back in business. So apple trees are a pretty forgiving crop in many ways. You can get trees that are screwed up in 20 different ways, and there's often a way back to getting healthy and productive trees again. Okay, the question is that heavy clay. I wonder if the soil's waterlogged and the roots aren't functioning very well because it's too wet. And that can produce symptoms looking pretty similarly. And so in that situation, if there's anything you can do to improve the drainage, that would certainly help. So in that situation, take a look at the soil, certainly in the spring and in the summer, and see if the soil really is too dry. I would be kind of surprised if it's a heavy clay soil and it's too dry. So maybe that's not the problem. Maybe there's some other issues going on there. So today we've been talking about apple trees and apple tree management. Many of the same approaches apply to pear trees, and so similar pruning, similar management. Peaches are entirely different. Because peaches fruit on 1 year old wood and only 1 year old wood. They don't fruit on older spurs like apples and pears do. And so our approach to pruning, our approach to fertilization on peaches is completely different.